Ukrainian forces succeeded in repelling numerous Russian attacks in the Donetsk region. Russian forces wanted to make progress in the direction of Bakhmut by carrying out heavy attacks on many settlements in the Donetsk region. However, the Ukrainian troops are fending off all attacks so that the Russian troops cannot gain this advantage. Russian forces are claimed to have completely captured the city of Marinka. Although this has not been independently verified in recent days, Russian forces have reported that they have taken control of many settlements in the Donetsk region. However, satellite images taken from the region show that Ukrainian troops are conducting defense activities in many cities in the Donetsk region. Chechen soldiers in the Ramzan Kadyrov battalion fighting for the Russian forces conducted a limited ground campaign in the western Donetsk Oblast. Ukrainian General Staff reported that Ukrainian forces repelled an attack near the city of Preshestovka, 60 kilometers southwest of Donetsk City in western Donetsk Oblast, especially in the city of Solidar of the Donetsk region. Russian forces are trying to seize the dominance of the region by making heavy attacks. Despite this, Ukrainian troops continue to defend many areas against Russian troops. In recent days, since the Kremlin government's focus has been on the Donbass region, Ukrainian and Russian troops have concentrated on a narrower battlefield. This concentration had an upward effect on the increase in the number of losses. Ukrainian forces attack the Russian army when they least expect it, causing the Russians to suffer more casualties. Increasing casualties are not a problem for Ukrainian forces as long as there is no missing military manpower. The reason for this situation is that many Western countries lend a helping hand to the Ukrainian forces. Whenever the Ukrainian forces have a military need, especially the United States of America prepares an aid package and sends it to Ukraine. But the Russian army is not as lucky as the Ukrainians for Russian forces. Even if one bullet is lost, it poses a major problem. There was a noticeable decrease in missile attacks by Russian forces targeting Ukrainian positions. The source of this decline is the ammunition problem experienced by Russia. Russian industry cannot produce the ammunition that the Russian army needs on the territory of Ukraine. In addition to the limited ammunition, the loss of military manpower also creates a significant problem in the Russian army. With the partial mobilization decree, Russian President Vladimir Putin decided to forcibly enlist 300,000 Russian citizens into the army. But Russian commanders lost most of the military manpower provided by Vladimir Putin. If the Russian army goes at this rate, it won't have enough troops to control the temporarily occupied territory in Ukraine very soon. By changing the target priority, the Ukrainian forces started targeting the Chechen and Wagner PMC soldiers who were a more difficult opponent than the Russian soldiers. At their points, neutralizing the troops of the Chechen battalion will reduce the quality of attacks on Ukrainian forces. The probability of the Ukrainian forces being damaged in poor-quality Russian attacks will be greatly reduced. The Ukrainian army is scanning the Donbass region with the help of unmanned aerial vehicles 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Unmanned aerial vehicles, which has been the Ukrainian army's most productive equipment since the beginning of the war, have become the fearful dream of the Russian army. Ukrainian forces both dropped bombs from unmanned aerial vehicles and provided intelligence to the artillery units by detecting the coordinates of the Russian army in the latest attack by Ukrainian forces. A drone under the control of Ukrainian air reconnaissance units detected an important outpost of Chechen troops fighting for Russia in the Donetsk region. It was determined that the police station where the Chechen forces are located also contains technical vehicles with high material value. Ukrainian forces destroyed the outpost with an accurate shot of the MD-12 anti-tank gun dubbed the Rapira. This successful attack by the Ukrainian forces was carried out by the 36th Separate Marine Brigade named after Rear Admiral Mikhailo Bolensky. 3 main battle tanks belonging to the Russian forces were detected at a point very close to the outpost containing Chechen soldiers, which is the target of Ukrainian forces. Ukrainian forces also managed to destroy 3 main battle tanks of the Russian army. The Rapira MD-12 anti-tank gun used in the attack is a Soviet 100mm anti-tank gun that entered service in 1961. Produced as a revolutionary in 1961, this anti-tank gun has been continuously developed with various variants over the years as the Current Affairs YouTube channel. All of our findings are created by the work and analysis of our field warfare expert team and are based on data from the US, UK, Russia, and Ukraine. Ministries of Defense and independent war analysis and monitoring sources. Russian forces are trying to make up for the lack of military manpower with Chechen fighters and soldiers of the mercenary contractor. The Ukrainian forces had a hard time fighting the Chechen battalion of Kadyrov and the mercenaries of the Wagner PMC. Chechens and Wagner PMC soldiers who were more trained and experienced than Russian soldiers were more helpful to the Kremlin's invasion plan than Russian soldiers. Ukrainian forces are attacking areas of military concentration in order to sweep the Russian soldiers from the territory of Ukraine. For Ukrainian forces, attacking an area with thousands of Russian soldiers could be a huge victory. However, attacking an area with hundreds of Chechen or Wagner PMC soldiers would be a more effective move for the Ukrainian army in the course of the war. After turning his main focus to the Donbas region, Vladimir Putin relies on Chechen fighters in the Donetsk region and on Wagner PMC mercenaries in the Luhansk region. Vladimir Putin owes it to the Chechen and Wagner PMC soldiers that the Donbas region did not fall against the intense attacks of the Ukrainian forces in the days when the number of casualties of the Russian forces as a result of the Ukrainian attacks exceeded 115,000. The Ukrainian forces caused the losses of the Russian army to increase thanks to the counterattacks, since the counterattacks are made while the Russian army is in the attacking position. The Russians are caught off guard and cannot fend off the attacks of the Ukrainian forces due to the decreasing military manpower. Day by day, the Russian forces are attacking the Ukrainian troops without tactics in order to achieve success quickly. However, these tactical attacks by the Russian forces will not help them achieve success in Ukraine. The tactical attacks of the Russian forces will be repelled by the Ukrainian forces, causing the Russian army to waste only ammunition. Russian forces are putting the Russian army in a difficult situation by using their limited opportunities in the most inefficient way due to the decrease in Russian ammunition day by day. The Kremlin government aims to meet this need of the Russian army with several different options. Russian leader Vladimir Putin met with defense industry bosses recently and drew attention to the need to increase production since the beginning of the war. The Russian defense industry has been working its employees for long periods of time with additional shifts. However, the wages required for these working hours are not paid to the factory workers. The Russian economy got worse with the sanctions that came with the war. The Russian people suffer greatly from the great decline in the Russian economy. Now, workers who do not get paid for their work by working long hours in factories may object to this way of working. And Russian President Vladimir Putin's full-blown Ukraine invasion plan could take factory workers in one blow. The Ukraine-Russia war has become more and more difficult for people from all parts of Russia as it gets harder. The number of anti-war people has increased in all parts of Russia. However, Vladimir Putin's decree on anti-war people prevents anti-war people from taking action across Russia. If the situation of Russian soldiers on the battlefield continues in this way, the Kremlin government will have to take more drastic decisions. However, this situation will not be welcomed by the Russian people. As a result of these events, the Kremlin government will suffer mostly Russian President Vladimir Putin. A move that will change the course of the war came from Ukraine. One of the most important convoys of the Russian army was destroyed immediately after it was detected. This event stunned the whole world. And thanks to this last operation of the Ukrainian army, a convoy of 12,400 pieces destined for the Russian army was completely destroyed. The details of the operation drove Putin crazy in the last days of the Russian-Ukrainian war. The Ukrainian army took a very critical step. Ukrainian soldiers who used the support they received from Western countries in the most important way started to continue their activities in every field. The most important of these supports was the training provided by Israeli intelligence. Israeli intelligence taught the Ukrainian army how to infiltrate the Russians. This changed the nature of all operations of the Ukrainian army. Ukrainian intelligence began to send many agents into the Russian army. These agents would help the Ukrainian army to achieve victory in a short period of time. This intelligence was tasked to take very important steps. Realizing that the defeat of the Russian army in hot conflicts did not mean anything, the Ukrainian army decided to pursue different policies. The main reason for this was Russia's continuous mobilization of both minorities living in the country and Russian youth. This made it impossible for the Ukrainian army to get the full results of the operations. The Ukrainian army then took a very hard step towards the Russians and paved the way for the Ukrainian army's success in every field. For this, it decided to determine the convoy routes, and the most critical route of the Russian army was identified. This step paved the way for the Ukrainian army to achieve its greatest success so far. The Ukrainian army started to determine the steps it would take towards the Russians. According to the information, the Russian army was waiting for a very large convoy. This convoy would provide the main resources for the operation on Bakhmut. The importance of this information was that Bakhmut was a region that was constantly the scene of active warfare. An operation in Bakhmut, which was constantly changing hands, could destroy Ukraine's sovereignty. Therefore, the Ukrainian army immediately mobilized all available ammunition and equipment, and the force to destroy the 12,400 pieces of convoy of the Russian army was mobilized. The Ukrainian army began to determine the route to Bakhmut. Calculating that the convoy would come from the Belgorod side, the Ukrainian soldiers immediately started moving towards the points of direct passage from that area. As a result of the calculations, it was estimated that the reinforcements would come through the direct route through which the safe passage would have been made earlier, and the Ukrainian army decided to mobilize the Special Forces team for this operation and direct it towards this region. This step of the Ukrainian army was recorded as the biggest step to be taken against the Russians. With the advantage of getting to this region first, the Ukrainian army estimated the length of the route and started laying mines and remote-controlled explosives. After this major breakthrough, the Ukrainian army placed one of its most powerful rocket launchers on a nearby hillside to deliver the real blow. This would pave the way for the Ukrainian army to strike the Russians directly. According to intelligence provided by agents in the Russian army, the convoy was on its way. After that, the Ukrainian army took its position and waited. When the convoy arrived in the area, the Ukrainian army was now in a position where it was ahead in every respect. And thanks to this, it even had the opportunity to completely expel the Russians from the region. The Ukrainian army learned about the approach of the convoy from behind the ambush on both sides. Thanks to the observation units and from the moment the convoy entered the area, it was a big surprise. The Ukrainian army spotted the armored vehicle at the front of the convoy. Detonating this vehicle would have completely locked the convoy. But if the right step was not taken at this point, the vehicles at the very back of the convoy would be able to find a way out. This is where the Ukrainian army is. Preposterous plan was put into action, and the Russian army entered its most helpless period. The vehicle at the front of the Russian convoy was detonated by remote-controlled explosives. This created a huge crisis for the convoy. The convoy had to stop in its tracks. The Russian soldiers who got out of their vehicles after that were at a loss. What to do? But in order to prevent a group from turning back, the Ukrainian army started firing at the vehicle in the back. Immediately afterwards, the Ukrainian army used rocket launchers to hit the rearmost vehicle of the Russian army. With this, the Ukrainian army actually gained the most advantageous position, and the Russian soldiers were surprised. A group of Russian soldiers moved to fight but gave up when they realized that Ukraine was surrounding them. After that, the Ukrainian army captured a large number of Russian soldiers. The convoy was cleared with vehicles and the movement was started to join the Ukrainian ranks. But the Russian army, which received the news of this, revealed great troubles, while Putin was reflected on the cameras in a very worried way. But it is estimated that the movement in this region will increase even more because the troubles experienced by the Russian army in recent times have become even more tense. As the Ukrainian army has been under pressure in recent days, and the Russian retreat in the areas captured by the Russians in Bakhmut has become a necessity. The Russian army's need for ammunition and vehicles has increased, and the importance of any possible support and convoys that the Russian army could get from this increased. Putin was as aware of this as everyone else, thanks to the recent breakthroughs of the Russian army. Everything was expected to become even more adequate. That's why this convoy was so critical. Everything Bakhmut needed was put together piece by piece. But the convoy failed to arrive, and now the Ukrainian army is in a position to take Bakhmut where it is ahead in every area in an even more complicated way. This has put many of the soldiers in the Russian army in a very difficult situation. In particular, many of the soldiers who fought in Bakhmut did not want to fight against Ukraine because the vast majority of Russian soldiers who do not have enough ammunition do not know exactly what to do. They suspect that if things keep going the way they are going, the casualties against the Ukrainian army will increase. And this situation has now become a huge problem for the soldiers in the Russian army. Putin's move, when he realized this, stunned the whole world. Russian soldiers who did not have enough advantage over Ukrainian soldiers as a result of the convoy not reaching the region, informed the Kremlin. What the Kremlin realized as a result of the scout-centered region was the fact that Ukraine had confiscated all the supplies. The Russian media, which was aware of the situation, wanted to report on this issue, but Putin was absolutely against it. He said that there could not be the slightest reporting on this, and that he would not create a position in which the Russian army was made to look so helpless. This was, of course, seen as obstructing the public's right to information. After these moves, which drew worldwide reaction, Russian soldiers who had not yet received even the slightest help began to react against the Kremlin. In order to prevent this, Putin mobilized the National Guard, known as his personal army. This move shows that Putin is actually trying to create an alternative to the Russian army in many areas. Putin has called the National Guard to duty. The idea was that these guards would not fight against Ukraine, but that they would be in charge of public order within the army. And this kind of a breakthrough in the Russian army is actually expected to put the army in serious trouble. The fact that such troubles will pave the way for civil unrest in Russia is thought to enable the Ukrainian army to take the lead. And while the Ukrainian army is now taking the step of completely repelling the Russians by achieving victory in many areas, Putin, who will experience great difficulties in case of increasing unrest within the Russian army and losing this war, is expected to resign.